They say the desert keeps its secrets till the wind decides to speak. But when a bleeding Apache girl stumbled onto Jonas Creed's porch one moonless night, the desert's silence was shattered. What followed would test the limits of loyalty, love, and survival. As shadows of death closed in, and Jonas was forced to choose between the life he knew and a future he never dared dream. And yet, the most dangerous secrets were the ones the girl carried with her, secrets that would twist fate in ways Jonas could not foresee. Jonas Creed had long believed he'd made peace with solitude. The kind of man who'd spent a decade with no company but the coyotes and the wind's mournful howl. His cabin stood at the edge of the Arizona Badlands, a place too dry and too far gone for most men to bother. Folks in the nearest town, 30 miles distant, spoke his name with a mix of respect and pity. A man who'd lost everything, his wife, his son, and his hope, and had nothing left but the land beneath his boots. That night, the storm was brewing, not a storm of thunder and rain, but one of fate. Jonas sat by his hearth, mending a worn saddle strap by the flicker of lamplight, when a sound broke the night's stillness. A knock, soft at first, then urgent, like the hand that made it was losing strength. Jonas froze. No one came to his door, not for 10 long years. He set the strap aside, his weathered hand moving toward the old Colt resting on the table, but something in that knock gave him pause. It was no threat. It was a plea. He opened the door to a sight that would haunt him, a young Apache girl, barely 17, her face pale beneath streaks of dried blood. She swayed on her feet, dark hair matted to her brow, one hand pressed to her side where blood seeped between her fingers. And yet, even in that moment of desperation, her eyes met his with a fire that spoke of strength unbroken. Before Jonas could speak, she collapsed into his arms, her breath warm against his throat, her body as light as a bird. He carried her inside, setting her gently on the old cot in the corner. His mind raced. Who was she running from? And how far behind were they? He fetched water, tore a strip from an old shirt to staunch the bleeding, and worked by lantern light through the long night, his hands steady though his heart thundered like a drum. Outside, the desert lay silent. But Jonas knew that silence wouldn't last, because whoever had driven this girl to his door wasn't far behind, and they'd be coming fast. Dawn hadn't yet broken, but Jonas's sharp ears caught what the girl's fear had warned of: hoofbeats, faint but certain, echoing off the canyon walls. Whoever hunted her was close, and they weren't bothering to hide their approach anymore. The girl stirred on the cot, eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze locked on Jonas, confusion and pain mingling in her dark eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice was little more than a whisper. Jonas knelt beside her, offering water from a battered tin cup. "Easy now, miss," he murmured. "You're safe for the moment, but you best tell me who's coming, so I know what we're facing." She swallowed, then found her voice, soft but firm. "White men, bounty hunters, 3, maybe 4. They want me dead, or worse." Jonas's jaw clenched. "What for?" But her eyes, wide with memories too raw to name, said more than words could. He didn't press further. No need. He'd seen this kind of fear before, in the faces of those who'd fled violence and betrayal. He rose, moving to the window, peering into the gray pre-dawn light. There, far off, the glint of metal, the shadow of riders picking their way across the flats. They'd be here before the sun cleared the horizon. Jonas checked his rifle, the weight of it familiar in his hands. He hadn't fired at a man in years, but he'd do it now if need be. The girl tried to sit up, wincing as fresh pain lanced through her side. "You should send me out," she gasped. "I bring trouble to your door," he shook his head. "Ain't my way to turn out a soul in need, and I don't reckon I could look myself in the mirror if I did." Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. Jonas's mind raced. He had no friends near enough to call on, no help but his own grit. The land around his cabin was open, with no cover but a few scattered boulders and mesquite. No place to hide, no place to run. But maybe, just maybe, a place to make a stand. He turned to the girl, seeing the gratitude in her gaze despite the pain. "You rest now. When they come, they'll find me first." And as the first streaks of sunlight touched the desert floor, Jonas Creed stood tall at his door, rifle in hand, waiting for the devils that rode his way. The sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, painting the world in gold and blood. Jonas Creed stood like a statue on his porch, the old rifle resting easy in his hands. His heart beat slow and steady, the same way it had the night his boy was born, the same way it had the night he buried his wife beneath the Joshua tree out back. This was the rhythm of a man who knew his time might be near, but wouldn't meet it running. The riders came into view at last. 3 of them, as the girl had said. Dust caked their coats and faces, and their eyes were hard and mean. The lead man, a wiry figure with a scar down his cheek and a battered hat pulled low, reined in just short of the porch. His companions flanked him, rifles resting across their saddles, ready but not yet aimed. "Mornin', old-timer," the leader called, his voice oily as a snake's. "Fine day, ain't it?" Jonas didn't lower his rifle. "Depends on your purpose." The man grinned, showing teeth gone yellow from tobacco. "Name's Silas. My boys and me. We're looking for something. Or rather, someone. We aim to have her, and we ain't particular how." Jonas's gaze stayed level. "Ain't no one here but me. You can turn yourselves around and ride on." Silas chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "See, that's the trouble with lying, mister. We been tracking her blood all night. It led us right to this door. Now, we can do this easy, or we can do it hard. But either way, that Apache filly comes with us." A silence fell so heavy you could hear the wind shift. Jonas shifted his weight, thumbed back the hammer on his rifle. "You're standing on my land, callin' trouble. I won't let you bring harm to that girl. You best think on that before you step 1 inch closer." Silas's grin slipped, and for the first time the glint of caution flickered in his eyes. He hadn't expected defiance from a loner like Jonas. But greed and cruelty ran deep in men like him, deeper than sense. He spat in the dust. "So be it, old man. You just signed your own death paper." The 3 dismounted slow, spreading out, boots crunching on dry earth. Jonas felt his breath steady as his finger eased against the trigger. The first move they made, he'd answer. And the desert would remember the sound of gunfire at Creed's cabin. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. The morning sun glared off rifle barrels. The desert wind carried only the hush of the land, as if even the earth waited to see what would happen next. Silas moved first. His hand went to his gun, slow at first, then quick as a striking rattler. But Jonas Creed was quicker. The old Winchester spoke with a crack that echoed off the canyon walls, and Silas's hat flew from his head as he stumbled back, his shoulder grazed, the force spinning him sideways. The 2 other men raised their rifles, but Jonas had already chambered another round. He fired again, aiming low, sending up a spray of dust at one man's feet. The fellow cursed, scrambled for cover behind a mesquite bush, his nerve faltering. The third dropped to one knee, leveling his rifle at the cabin. A slug tore through the porch post beside Jonas, showering him with splinters. Calm as ever, he stepped back into the doorway's shadow, making himself small. The old cabin was built solid, thick timbers that could stop a bullet or 2. From inside, the girl cried out faintly, but Jonas didn't dare look back. His world had narrowed to the dance of shadow and sun out front, and the men trying to kill him. "Creed!" Silas shouted from where he crouched behind a boulder. His voice was ragged with pain and fury. "You got 1 chance to walk away. Give us the girl, and we'll let you be." Jonas's answer was the steady, metallic click of his rifle being cocked once more. His voice carried steady as bedrock. "I don't truck with men who hunt women. You want her, you'll have to come through me." The man behind the mesquite bush fired again, the bullet chewing into the cabin wall. But his aim was wild now, the kind of shot made by a man who'd started to doubt. The other cursed, holding his bleeding arm, his courage slipping fast. Jonas knew they wouldn't back off easy, but they weren't ready for a fight with a man who'd lived with ghosts and had nothing left to fear. Out here, a man's choices echoed longer than gunshots. The air grew hotter, though the sun had only begun to climb. Jonas Creed stood in the doorway, heart steady as the desert hills, eyes narrowed against the glare. Outside, dust swirled where the outlaws crouched, Silas clutching his arm, the other 2 shifting nervously behind scant cover, realizing this was no easy mark they'd cornered. Another crack split the stillness. The man behind the mesquite bush fired wild, his bullet punching harmlessly into the cabin's thick doorframe. Jonas answered with a shot that shattered a rock inches from the gunman's head, sending chips flying. The fellow yelped, diving for better cover, heart no longer in it. Inside, the girl's breathing grew ragged. Jonas could hear it between the shots, the sound of a life hanging by a thread. He stole a glance over his shoulder. She'd tried to rise, blood staining the bandage at her side, but she slumped now, too weak to do more. A sudden idea sparked in Jonas's mind, a plan as risky as any gamble he'd ever taken. He reached for the small keg of lamp oil by the hearth, grabbed it one-handed while keeping his rifle trained on the yard. The men outside were shouting now, arguing about whether to press on or flee. Jonas kicked the door open wide, hurling the keg toward Silas's boulder. Before it hit the ground, his rifle spoke again, and the bullet struck true. The keg burst in a sheet of flame, oil spreading like molten gold across the dry brush. The explosion of fire drove the outlaws back, their curses lost in the sudden roar. Flames licked up the boulder's side, smoke curling into the morning sky. Silas's voice came ragged through the smoke. "You damn fool! You'll burn yourself out along with us." Jonas stepped forward, silhouetted by the rising heat. "Better to die honest than live with your kind at my door." The two henchmen bolted, spooked by fire and gunfire alike. Their horses' hooves pounded as they fled, leaving Silas alone, trapped between the burning brush and Jonas's steady aim. But Jonas knew the fight wasn't over yet. Silas was a man cornered, and that made him dangerous. The smoke coiled like a serpent, hiding the desert's edges, casting everything in shifting shadow. The heat of the fire licked at Silas's hiding place, and Jonas Creed watched through narrowed eyes as the outlaw weighed his choices: burn, bolt, or fight. A sudden crackle of brush, and Silas made his move. He sprang from behind the boulder, gun raised, a snarl twisted across his face. His coat was singed, his hat gone, his hair wild from the heat. He charged low, hoping the smoke and chaos would throw off Jonas's aim. But Jonas Creed had seen too many storms to flinch now. He stepped clear of the doorway, leveled the rifle in one smooth motion, and fired. The shot rang out sharp, the sound tearing through the roar of the flames. Silas stumbled, his revolver falling from his grasp as he crumpled to his knees. For a breathless moment Jonas watched, waiting for some trick, some last cruel twist. But Silas's hands came up empty, trembling in surrender. His gaze, full of hate and defeat, met Jonas's for the first time as an equal. A man who'd lost. Jonas approached slow, rifle still trained, boots crunching on the blackened earth. Silas spat into the dust, bitter as gall. "You should have let me take her. Now you'll both hang, or burn out here." Jonas shook his head. "I don't reckon I could live with myself if I'd done otherwise." The fire had begun to die down, smoke drifting low as the wind shifted west. The horses of the fleeing men were dots on the horizon now, no sign they meant to return. Silas, wounded and spent, slumped forward, breath rasping. Jonas bound his hands with a strip torn from his own coat. He'd no desire to kill a man who'd surrendered. The code of the land was hard, but it wasn't cruel. Behind him, the girl moaned softly, the strain of the fight having taken its toll. Jonas turned back to her, heart heavy with the weight of what came next. The danger might be past, for now, but the future lay uncertain as the desert itself, and somewhere beyond these scorched flats, more trouble surely waited. The wind carried away the last of the smoke as the sun climbed higher, bathing the land in harsh light. Jonas Creed wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes scanning the horizon. Silas lay bound and beaten beside the blackened boulder, groaning low but beaten for good. His threats, like the fire, had burned themselves out. Jonas knelt beside the girl once more. Her skin was pale as bone, but her breathing steadied, shallow and slow. The bandage at her side was soaked through, and Jonas knew he had no choice now but to act fast. The cabin could no longer be their refuge. The smoke would draw eyes from miles around. Ranchers, lawmen, maybe more hunters like Silas's crew. And the girl, she needed more than what he could offer here. He packed what little supplies he could. A canteen, some hardtack, a blanket, and saddled his horse. A patient sorrel named Copper, who'd carried him through 10 years of lonely trails. Jonas moved with the certainty of a man who'd made up his mind. He wouldn't let her die here. Not when there was still hope. Silas lifted his head weakly as Jonas loaded the girl into the saddle before him. "You'll die out there, Creed," he croaked. "You and her both. Desert don't spare fools." Jonas mounted, the girl cradled against his chest. His eyes met Silas's one last time. "I'll take my chances with the desert over the likes of you." With a nudge of his heel, Copper turned toward the east, toward the promise of the distant hills and the hidden canyons beyond. Jonas didn't look back. He rode steady, the rhythm of hoofbeats a drumbeat of resolve. The girl stirred in his arms, her voice a faint whisper. "Why? Why help me?" Jonas gazed out across the empty land, his voice quiet. "Because no one helped when my family needed it. And because right's right." The sun blazed overhead as they rode into the unknown, the cabin and its smoke a memory already fading behind them. What lay ahead, Jonas couldn't say. But he knew this. He wouldn't stop riding until she was safe, or he'd fall trying. The desert stretched endless ahead, a sea of rock and sand, broken only by the jagged teeth of distant mesas. Jonas Creed kept his eyes on the land, scanning every rise and hollow for signs of danger. The girl, wrapped in the blanket he'd tied across his chest, slept fitful against him, her breath warm against his throat. They rode hard through the heat of the day, stopping only once at a shallow wash to water the horse and let the girl drink. Jonas wetted a rag and wiped her brow, the fever creeping in now as her body fought the wound. Time was running short. There was a town 2 days' ride east, if Copper held out, if the girl held on, if fortune favored them. But Jonas knew better than to trust fortune. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert in red and gold, Jonas spotted what he feared most. Dust on the western horizon, faint but rising steady. Riders. He couldn't tell how many, but enough to stir the dust so high. And they were gaining. "Damn," Jonas muttered, tightening his grip on the reins. He urged Copper into a steady canter, not wanting to run the horse to ruin, but knowing they couldn't dawdle. He aimed for a narrow canyon ahead, a place to hide or make a stand if it came to that. Night fell quick in the desert, shadows swallowing the land. The stars blinked awake overhead as Jonas reached the canyon mouth. The walls rose steep and dark, the air cooler here, the ground firm beneath Copper's hooves. Jonas guided the horse deep into the cleft, listening for the sound of pursuit. And then, as he rounded a bend, his heart sank. A figure blocked the narrow pass, a tall man, lean as a wolf, with a rifle resting easy in his hands. Behind him, 2 others emerged from the gloom, their faces lost in shadow but their intent clear as day. Jonas reined in, the girl stirring weakly against him. The tall man's voice echoed in the canyon like the voice of doom. "Thought you could slip by, Creed? We've been waiting. Hand over the girl, and maybe we'll let you ride on." Jonas's hand tightened on his rifle, his mind racing. He'd escaped Silas's crew, but these men, these were new devils entirely, and they had him cornered. Jonas Creed's eyes darted between the shadows, measuring distance, gauging chances. His fingers brushed the stock of his rifle, but he didn't lift it. Not yet. The girl stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips, and the sound seemed to hang in the canyon like a ghost's cry. The tall man stepped forward into the moonlight, and Jonas's breath caught in his throat. That face, he knew it. Gideon Calder. A man Jonas had once called friend, back before grief and bitterness had driven them down separate trails. They'd ridden together during the war, fought side by side, but that was another lifetime. "Gideon," Jonas said, voice low with disbelief. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Gideon grinned, but there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. "Ain't about God, Sam. It's about gold." Jonas frowned, confusion warring with anger. "Gold? There ain't no gold here. What are you rambling about?" The second man, broad-shouldered, with a scar splitting his chin, laughed, a harsh sound. "Tell him, Gideon." "Might as well let him die knowing the truth." Gideon's grin widened. "That girl you're risking your neck for, she ain't just some runaway, Sam. She's the daughter of the Apache chief who found silver up north, and folks'll pay plenty to get their hands on her. Not for ransom, mind, for leverage. To take that land, take that silver. That's why we're here." Jonas's stomach turned. The girl had spoken of hunters, but not of this, not of the greed driving them. He looked down at her pale face, the way she clung to life despite the odds, and something deep inside him hardened like iron. "You always were good at selling out, Gideon," Jonas said, voice like stone. "But you won't sell her, not while I draw breath." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Then I reckon we'll just have to take that breath from you." The canyon went silent, the kind of silence that comes before lightning strikes. And Jonas knew this fight would end one way only. The moon cast silver across the canyon walls, turning the world sharp and cold. Jonas Creed felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, the steady thump of the girl's weak heartbeat where she rested against him. The wind stirred the dust at his feet, as if the desert itself braced for what was coming. Gideon Calder raised his rifle, slow and sure. His two men fanned out, boots scraping on rock, their shadows long and twisted on the canyon floor. "I don't want to kill you, Sam," Gideon said, though the hunger in his eyes betrayed the lie. "But I will." Jonas's voice was quiet, steady as bedrock. "Then get to it." Before the last word left his mouth, Jonas kicked his boot into Copper's flank. The horse reared, neighing loud enough to startle the nearest man. In that instant, Jonas fired. The flash lit the canyon. The shot rang true. The broad-shouldered man fell, rifle clattering on stone. The second man cursed, scrambling to aim. But Jonas spurred Copper hard, riding straight at him, forcing the fellow to dive aside. Gideon's shot rang out, splintering rock inches from Jonas's head. The sharp sting of stone shards cut his cheek, but he didn't slow. The canyon's narrow walls gave Jonas cover as he rode, weaving Copper between boulders, making himself a harder target. He chambered another round, breath harsh in his throat, eyes fixed on Gideon's shape in the moonlight. Gideon fired again, the bullet whining past Jonas's ear. The girl moaned softly, her arms tightening weakly around him. Jonas gritted his teeth, swung Copper around and fired once more. His shot struck Gideon's rifle, knocking it from his hands, the metal clanging against the rocks. For a heartbeat, Gideon stood frozen, disarmed, the fight gone from him. But then his hand dropped to the knife at his belt, and Jonas knew this wasn't over. The canyon, once silent, now echoed with gunfire, and the ragged breath of men who'd gambled everything on this night. And Jonas Creed, battered but unbroken, prepared to see it through. Moonlight glinted off Gideon's blade as he rushed forward, boots pounding the canyon floor. Jonas Creed dismounted in a fluid motion, setting the girl down gently against a rock. She stirred, eyes flickering open, too weak to cry out but strong enough to understand danger loomed. Jonas faced Gideon with nothing but the weight of years, the steel of his will, and the rifle still gripped in one hand. But the space was too tight, Gideon too quick, no time to shoulder and fire. Gideon's knife flashed, slicing the air as he lunged. Jonas stepped aside, the blade grazing his coat, tearing cloth but missing flesh. He swung the rifle like a club, the butt catching Gideon hard in the ribs. The outlaw staggered, breath whooshing from his lungs, but he didn't fall. He came again, slashing wild, driven by greed and fury. The canyon seemed to close in rock walls rising like grave markers, the stars watching cold and distant. Jonas ducked the next swipe, planted his boot firm, and drove his shoulder into Gideon's chest, knocking him back against a boulder. The knife clattered to the ground. For a moment, Gideon's eyes met Jonas's, and in them was something Jonas hadn't seen in a long while. Fear, not of death, but of failure, of a prize slipping through his fingers. "You should have stayed buried with your ghosts, Sam," Gideon hissed, breath ragged. Jonas shook his head. "Some ghosts are worth fighting for." With that, he swung the rifle one last time. The blow sent Gideon sprawling, senseless on the stone. His chest rose and fell, alive, but beaten. Jonas stood over him, chest heaving, the weight of the night pressing down. The canyon fell silent again, the echoes of the fight fading into the dark. He turned to the girl, kneeling beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're not done yet," he whispered, "but we've bought a little more time." And as the desert wind swept through the canyon, it carried away the last of the blood, smoke, and dust, leaving only the promise of what came next. The sun burned high, fierce and unforgiving. Jonas urged Copper onward, every mile stealing strength from horse and rider. The girl's breath came shallow, her skin hot with fever. He didn't look back. No time for fear, only forward. At last, a line of trees, a trickle of water, and a forgotten shack leaning beneath their shade. Jonas slid from the saddle, carried the girl inside, and checked her wound. The bleeding hadn't stopped. The fever was rising. Then, a sound. A branch snapped. A whisper of boots on dry earth. Jonas's hand found his rifle as figures stepped from the trees. 3 men, dusty and armed. The leader smiled like a snake. "Mighty kind of you to bring her to us, Creed." Jonas said nothing, but his grip tightened. The fight wasn't over. The stars began to fade. The eastern sky streaked with gray as Jonas Creed rode on, the girl cradled against him, light as a feather but heavy with the weight of what they'd endured. Copper's gait slowed, the faithful beast near spent, but Jonas urged him gently onward, whispering encouragement like a prayer. As the first light of dawn painted the world in soft gold, Jonas spotted what he'd been hoping for, a line of cottonwoods, their green leaves a promise of water. Beneath them, a shallow stream trickled over smooth stones. Beside it stood a small, weathered shack, the remains of an old prospector's claim, long abandoned, or so Jonas thought. He dismounted, carrying the girl inside and laying her on the single cot. The place smelled of dust and old wood, but it was shelter, and for now, that was enough. He knelt beside her, checking the bandage, the fever in her skin a fresh worry. She needed more than what he could give. Jonas stepped outside, letting Copper drink deep at the stream. He splashed water on his face, trying to wash away the exhaustion that clung to him like the desert dust. His head lifted at a sudden sound, the crack of a twig, soft but sharp in the morning hush. From the shadows of the trees, a man stepped forth. A stranger, tall and lean, with a long coat dusty from the trail, and eyes that glinted sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Behind him, 2 more figures appeared, rifles cradled easy in their arms. "Mighty fine of you to lead us here, friend," the stranger said, his voice smooth as creek stone. "We've been looking for that girl of yours, figured you'd save us the trouble of huntin'." Jonas froze, heart sinking. He'd hoped for refuge, but instead he'd led danger right to their door. The stranger smiled, slow and sure. "Now let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you ride on." Jonas's hand slid toward his rifle. His voice was steady as ever. "You've made a mistake, friend. If you want her, you'll have to take me first." And as the sun broke over the horizon, the desert seemed to hold its breath once more. The dawn light spilled across the land, turning the cottonwood's leaves to silver. Jonas Creed stood between the shack and the stream, his shadow long on the dust. The girl lay inside, too weak to move, too sick to know how close death had come again. The stranger stepped forward, hands easy at his sides but eyes cold, his coat parted just enough to show the grip of a pistol, worn smooth from use. The 2 men behind him spread out, taking position like wolves circling prey. "Don't be a fool, Creed," the stranger said, his tone still calm, still dangerous. "You're alone, you're tired. That girl ain't worth dying for. Just hand her over." Jonas shook his head slow, his fingers tightening on the rifle's stock. "No man buys his soul by selling out the helpless." The stranger's smile turned thin. "Suit yourself." In a heartbeat, the stillness shattered. Jonas's rifle came up, the shot ringing out like a thunderclap in the morning air. One of the men behind the stranger cried out, clutching his arm as his rifle fell. The other fired wild, the bullet tearing through a branch overhead, scattering leaves like rain. Jonas ducked behind the shack's corner, heart pounding, mind clear. The stranger fired twice, the shot splintering the shack's doorframe. Inside, the girl moaned faintly, the fight stirring her from fevered sleep. The stranger cursed low. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Creed, but if it's blood you want—" Another shot cracked out. Jonas's. The second of the stranger's men fell back, his hat flying, his nerve gone. He scrambled for cover, swearing, leaving his leader exposed. The stranger's face darkened. His hand hovered near his pistol, hesitating for the first time. Jonas stepped out slow, rifle raised but not yet fired. His voice was like the desert wind, quiet but carrying far. "You've lost this fight. Take your men and go. There's no silver here worth your souls." For a moment, the stranger's fingers twitched at his gun, but something in Jonas's gaze, or maybe the weight of failure, broke his will. He spat into the dust, nodded once, and called to his men. "Let's ride!" The three turned, limping and bitter, vanishing into the morning light. Jonas exhaled slow, the tension easing from his shoulders. But the fight had cost him time, strength, and hope was wearing thin. Inside the shack, the girl whispered, "Jonas." He knelt beside her, wiping the sweat from her brow. "We're not done yet, miss. Just a little further." And with the day young and the desert wide, Jonas Creed prepared to ride again. The sun climbed higher, fierce and merciless, baking the land beneath its glare. Jonas Creed mounted Copper, lifting the girl gently before him, securing her with the last of his strength and the last of his hope. Her skin burned with fever, her breath came shallow, and Jonas felt the weight of every mile still between them and salvation. He spurred Copper into motion, not fast, not yet. He needed the horse's strength to last, needed the animal's courage to match his own. The shack and the stream, the men who'd come with greed in their eyes, all faded behind him as he rode into the wide open plain. There was only the girl, the horse, and the horizon. Hours blurred as one. The desert shimmered with heat, the air heavy and dry. Copper's sides heaved, sweat darkening his coat. But he pressed on, loyal, as the day was long. Jonas's throat burned, his vision dimmed, but he kept to the trail he knew, the one that led east, toward the town, toward a chance. By midday the first signs of hope appeared, a black line against the sky, smoke rising from chimneys, a cluster of buildings, small but real, a town. Jonas's heart surged, but he didn't let his guard slip. The land had taught him too many lessons about hope's price. As they drew closer, he saw figures moving at the edge of town. A rider galloped out, dust rising beneath his horse's hooves. Jonas reined in, watching the man approach. The rider was young, wearing a deputy's badge that caught the sun's light. He slowed as he neared, taking in Jonas's worn face, the girl's limp form, and the desperation written plain in both. "Trouble?" the deputy called, voice wary but not unkind. Jonas nodded, words thick in his throat. "She's hurt, needs a doctor, fast." The deputy swung down from his horse. One look at the girl and his face softened. "Come on. Doc Grady's place is just up the street. You're near done, friend, but you made it." Jonas followed, Copper stumbling with exhaustion, but carrying them that last stretch. Townfolk gathered at doorways, watching, murmuring, eyes wide at the sight of the battered man and the girl he'd fought so hard to save. At last, they reached a squat, whitewashed building. The doctor burst out as the deputy shouted for him, and strong hands lifted the girl down, carrying her inside. Jonas slid from the saddle, legs near giving out. He leaned against Copper's neck, whispering thanks, while inside the doctor's voice gave orders sharp and sure. And for the first time in days, Jonas Creed let himself hope. Jonas stood outside the doctor's cabin, his rifle resting in his arms, his body worn but his mind sharp. Inside, the doctor fought for the girl's life. Outside, the world kept on, children's laughter, the clink of a blacksmith's hammer, the soft hum of a town that didn't yet know death might be riding in. The deputy joined him, offering water. Jonas drank, eyes never leaving that door. "You think she'll make it?" the deputy asked. Jonas's voice was low. "If anyone can save her, it's that doctor." And then, a sound that froze his blood. Hoofbeats. Distant, but coming fast. He straightened, rifle ready. The storm wasn't done with him yet. The afternoon shadows stretched long across the little town, the heat of the day ebbing as a breeze stirred the dust in the street. Jonas Creed remained by the hitching post, every muscle in his body aching from the trail, but he would not leave his watch. His eyes stayed fixed on the doctor's door, the place where all his hope now rested. The townfolk kept their distance, but their curiosity couldn't be hidden. A shopkeeper stepped out now and again, casting a look Jonas's way. Children peered from behind barrels and fence posts, whispering as they watched the silent, dust-covered man who'd ridden in like some figure from the old stories. Then came a sound that turned Jonas's blood cold. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then growing louder. Not from within the town, but from the west, beyond the line of hills where the sun sank low. He straightened, his weariness falling away like an old coat. The deputy emerged from the saloon, eyes narrowing at the distant dust cloud rising against the setting sun. "More trouble?" the deputy asked, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Jonas nodded. "I reckon. I knew it wouldn't be over so easy." The deputy gave a sharp whistle, and within moments, a handful of townsmen appeared. Ranch hands, a blacksmith, a storekeeper. None of them lawmen, none of them eager for a fight, but all of them ready to defend what was theirs. Jonas stepped into the street, rifle in hand. His heart was steady now, no room left for fear. He'd come too far, bled too much, to let it end at the hands of another gang of greedy men. As the riders drew closer, their shapes became clear, 6 of them at least, hard-faced and armed, moving with the confidence of men who thought they owned the land and all upon it. The leader rode ahead, his hat pulled low, a black bandana tied at his throat. His voice rang out as they slowed before the gathered townsfolk. "We're looking for a girl. Apache, sick, hurt. She was took by a man riding a sorrel gelding. We mean to have her." Jonas's voice answered, low but carrying clear on the evening breeze. "She's under my protection, and if you aim to harm her, you'll have to come through me and these good folk." The leader laughed, a sound that chilled the bone. "We'll see about that, old man." And as night crept across the land, the standoff began, a line drawn in the dust, with lives hanging on which way the wind would blow. The last of the sunlight bled from the sky, leaving the world painted in hues of gray and shadow. Jonas Creed stood in the street, the weight of his rifle steady in his hands, his boots planted firm in the dust. Behind him, the townsfolk formed a ragged line, no soldiers, but men ready to fight for what was right. Across from them, the gang fanned out, their horses snorting, the riders' faces hard and hungry. The leader leaned forward in his saddle, his grin a flash of white in the growing dark. "Last chance, Creed," he called. "Step aside, and nobody else has to die tonight." Jonas didn't blink, didn't waver. "You want her? You come take her. But I warn you, you won't leave this town whole." The wind carried the silence between them, heavy as iron. Then the leader spat, and with a sharp cry, kicked his horse forward, drawing his pistol in one smooth motion. But Jonas had seen it coming. His rifle spoke first. A crack that echoed through the town like thunder. The leader's hat flew from his head as his horse reared, and chaos erupted. The townsfolk fired as the gang charged. Smoke and dust filled the air, horses screaming, men shouting. The blacksmith dropped his hammer for a shotgun, felling a rider who came too close. The deputy's pistol barked twice, sending another outlaw spinning from his saddle. Jonas stood fast, working the lever of his rifle with a calm born of years on the edge of death. He dropped another rider, then swung the barrel toward a third, only to see the man turn and flee, spurring his horse hard. The attack faltered. The gang's courage broke like glass underfoot. 2 turned tail, galloping into the night, leaving their fallen behind. The leader, dazed but alive, wheeled his horse and followed, his pistol dropped somewhere in the fray. Then, as sudden as it began, the street fell quiet, but for the moans of the wounded and the ragged breath of those who'd stood their ground. Jonas lowered his rifle, his heart heavy. He hadn't wanted bloodshed, but he'd given no other choice. The doctor's door opened then, and the man himself stepped out, face drawn with exhaustion, but eyes bright with news. "She's alive," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "and she's gonna stay that way, thanks to you." And for the first time in many years, Jonas Creed felt the weight on his soul begin to lift. "She'll live," the doctor said at last, stepping out into the dawn. "The worst is behind her, if she can rest and heal." Jonas Creed nodded, but his gaze was already on the horizon. "She won't find peace here. Not for long. Trouble will follow." The deputy gripped his shoulder. "You'll have help if you stay." But Jonas shook his head. "I won't bring ruin to a good town. It's time to ride. Time to find a place where the past can't reach us." He saddled Copper, the girl resting against him, and together they rode into the rising sun, not fleeing anymore, but chasing something new. Morning broke gentle over the land, the first rays of sunlight painting the town's rooftops gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hush that felt like a promise. Jonas Creed stood by Copper, saddling up for what would be the most important ride of his life. Not a flight from danger this time, but a journey toward hope. The girl stood beside him, pale but steady, wrapped in a blanket the doctor had pressed into their hands. Her dark eyes met Jonas's, filled with gratitude and a quiet strength. She said nothing. There was no need. They understood each other now, bound by all they'd endured. The townsfolk gathered to see them off. The blacksmith, the storekeeper, the deputy, even the doctor, wiping his hands on his apron. The deputy stepped forward, offering Jonas a firm handshake. "You ride safe, Creed. You ever need a place to land, you'll find friends here." Jonas nodded, his voice rough with feeling. "I thank you. For everything." He helped the girl onto Copper, then swung up behind her. The old horse snorted softly, as if knowing this ride was different, no longer chased by death, but riding toward something worth living for. As they set out, the town fell behind them, its dust and smoke fading into memory. Before them stretched the wide-open land, full of promise and uncertainty, but Jonas's heart was light. The ghosts that had haunted him for so long seemed smaller now, left behind in that little town. The girl leaned against him, weary but safe. Together they rode east, where the hills rose gentle and green, where a new beginning waited. And as the sun rose high, casting its warmth across the land, Jonas Creed knew one thing for certain: the hardest trails led to the truest destinations. And this was the start of theirs.